So I'll kick off just with a quick introduction. My name is Ed. I am one of the co-founders of 𝗂𝗗𝗵𝗲. And today I'm going to be talking you through customer journey mapping and giving you a little overview of how to do that. Um, just a few kind of notes on housekeeping as we get going. Yes, this is being recorded. So if you have to leave early, there will be a recording you can access. We'll send you both the recording and a couple of links in a little follow-up email tomorrow. If you have questions, please do ask them in the chat. I'll be trying to keep one eye on that as we go through and answering as many questions as I can over the course of the session. Just to give you a quick introduction to 𝗂𝗂𝗵𝗲, if you haven't heard of us before, then we provide training and support to tech leaders and product managers. And what makes our stuff kind of really stand out is we're all ex-operators ourselves. We write from our own experience and experience that we've collected from other people like us. That means it's very, very practical. We really try and focus on stuff that's going to accelerate your career, so get you promoted, get you new jobs that is immediately applicable, and we try to make it comprehensive as well, so you have all the tools, all the information that you need to get your job done. We do a whole range of things. So we have a bunch of self-paced courses, bite-sized topics, live courses that are great on a range of topics from discovery, strategy, building with AI, a whole range of different skills there. And then we have a fairly comprehensive wiki and template library with a bunch of how-to guides and then templates to get you kind of up and running as soon as possible. And throughout that, what we focus on is not kind of having 5 articles with slightly different views on how to do the same thing, but really just having one definitive view to how to do, whatever it is you're trying to get done. We also got a community Slack, which is pretty lively if you're looking for community, maybe in an organization where you don't have any other PMs or you don't have a strong community of practice. And that's a great place to hang out and speak to other people as well. So this webinar we're going to be talking about customer journey mapping. That's part of our discovery course. We've got a great article on this, which you can find on the website. We've also collected a bunch of different examples of different companies' customer journey maps, which you'll also find on 𝗂𝗂𝗵𝗲. And we've got a couple of templates, one in Miro and one in Figma. So I'll be talking through the Miro one, but these are basically copies of each other. They're the same thing, just on different platforms. So first thing I wanted to kick off with was, why would you use a customer journey map? And there's sort of like 4 kind of reasons I think that customer journey maps are really useful. So firstly, they're really good for understanding the user experience holistically. So not just looking at what is the flow on the website, but really considering all the different touch points that a user has, maybe coming from social media or a different platform. How do they actually come onto your product? How are they then interacting with emails or sales agents or real people, as well as their digital product, and giving you that kind of cross-platform understanding. That then means that you can really deeply empathize with your users and really understand what their experience is and how they're finding it. That is in turn very useful for driving cross-functional alignment. So often you have, one team might be looking at the website, another team might be looking at the emails, another team might be looking at the marketing copy or ads. And when you stick it all on the same page, then it's much easier to come up with a holistic view of what you're trying to do and how you can collaborate more effectively with people in different teams. And you can, by sticking it all down on one page, then often why people are creating these customer journey maps is because they help you identify the key problems that you need to be solving for your customers and that are going to generate more impact for your business. So that's why you would do it. A quick kind of like abstract overview. What does a customer journey map look like? I almost think of it as like these three bits. So, you know, going from left to right, you've got a series of steps that describe the customer journey. So you're seeing the customer journey, whatever that is, a purchase journey, onboarding flow, going from left to right. And for each of those steps, you're then describing it in a few different ways. So, but basically, you're trying to match, the customer experience. So what they actually see and hear and touch. What are the websites they're seeing, the emails they're reading, what physical products do they actually come into contact with, and then you're trying to understand, their behavior and reaction to that. So how do they feel? What do they do? What is their response to what you're putting in front of them? And by doing those two things, you're then getting this really deep understanding of like, well, okay, this is how our customers respond to our product, and this is why they're responding in that way. So with that, I am going to dive into this template and just talk you through how it's put together in a little bit more detail. And you can put these together in various different ways, but the way that I'm going to describe it is a fairly logical way of creating it as well. So if you just give me a moment, I will switch over my screen. Okay, so this is the Miro template. As I say, you can find this on Miro. You can Google it, or you can find it on the 𝗂𝗲𝗵𝗸 website as well. And we kind of outline. You can see on the template, it's got these kind of little blue markers here, and we're going to use those to kind of. I'm going to talk through each of those so you understand kind of how you would go about creating one of these for yourself. So see, first thing that I like to do is just start with defining sort of the persona or the segment that you are trying to, you're empathizing with, that you're going to kind of map their experience. So in this case, this example is all about the purchase journey on eBay. And so we've chosen a sort of high intent buyer journey. She's on mobile, and to kind of just understand her a little bit more detail, we've just kind of noted down her needs and her frustrations. So this doesn't need to be super detailed. And if you're doing a basic B2C product where you've basically got one customer segment, you might even need to do it at all. But if you're building B2B SaaS, or you're building like a multi-sided marketplace, something where you've got like multiple different personas, then it's really useful just to be like super clear up front, like whose experience are you mapping? Because that might vary a little bit. And if you're not clear about that, then you might start confusing people about what you're actually doing. So first things first, like, who's the person you're mapping their experience? Once you've done that, we're going to start kind of thinking about what does this table, this kind of matrix actually look like. So the first thing I do is actually like jump to the end and say, what is the customer goal that we are trying to get people to? So in this case, we're saying, okay, like we want to get, as eBay, we want to get as many people as possible to make a purchase. So in this case, we'd say like that is the goal, is like making a purchase, and we're going to map the process where they get there. You might end up mapping a part of that process, or something, or just a fraction of the customer journey, something like an onboarding flow, a complaints flow. I mean, there's lots of different customer journeys that you can map out, but just being clear on kind of what is the destination, what is the end of that flow, kind of is the first step. Once you've done that, you can then kind of work backwards and say like, okay, if that's the goal, where do we start? And then how do we break that journey down into a few different steps? Now, how many steps is kind of like a kind of a good question, right? How many do you want there to be, like 20 steps or 4 steps? I mean, partly this is determined by just how many screens do people have to go through. But more importantly, I would say, somewhere between kind of like 4 and 10 steps generally works quite well, because it gives you enough granularity that you can understand what's going on, but it's not like so much detail that it's overwhelming. So if you have a lot more steps than that, and as in a lot more screens that people have to go through, a lot more touch points that they're having, you might want to group those together, or you might just want to look at a subsection of that journey at one go, just to understand what's going on there. And similarly, like if you're looking at your journey and you can only think of two different steps, you're really not going to have enough granularity to understand what's going on in the journey. So you try and kind of like break that out into a bit more detail, just so you can see, how people are going from one screen to the next, or from one touch point to the next. So those are kind of like the kind of just mapping out this x-axis you've got here, like what are the different steps, and kind of plotting that out. Once you've got that sort of x-axis plotted, like saying, right, okay, I've got the number of steps, then you can start to work down the touch points. You can kind of like start to fill out this y-axis. So you can fill out customer touch points, how those touch points are making customers think and feel, and you can also add other data and insights that you've got. Now, you can create a customer journey map like this on your own, and you'll come up with something that's usually great starting point, good to share with other people. Something like this might take you a couple of hours. If you have the ability to do this with a few other people, and ideally not just people in the product team like your designer or an engineer, but maybe people from other teams like a customer service person or a marketing person, then that is when things get really powerful, because it creates this shared understanding between different teams about where the customer, what the customer journey is, what is driving their experience, and where the problems are that you want to solve as a whole. So it turns it from a sort of like team-centric tool into a much more kind of customer-centric, what is the true customer experience going on? And so you can do all of these things sort of in that workshop. Define the steps. Like, how do people think that it makes sense to break up this journey? And then having done that, you can start to kind of illustrate, so what are these touch points? So starting with the touch points, then usually the first thing that I do is think about screenshots, emails, like what are the obvious digital touch points, and potentially physical ones. Do people get a product in the mail? Do they get a letter or something? Do they sit down at a restaurant, or does their Uber ride arrive? Think about what are those touch points and just lay those out into each of your steps. And as you do that, it can also be helpful to think about the kind of user stories. So for this particular step, what is the user trying to do? And these would all be phrases, like the user, I want to do X, I want to do Y, or I need to do X, or I need to do Y, right? So you can start getting a sense of like, okay, when I'm on the search page, I want to find what I'm looking for quickly. I want to be able to refine my search, and this is what I'm seeing. Now, these user stories, they might come from user research, ideally, if you've got that kind of insight from speaking to customers themselves or watching them. It might come just from your kind of general intuition or empathy for customers as a starting point, if you haven't had a chance to do that discovery yet. And I'd say with all of these things, you can start with just thinking about your own experiences you go through the flow, and really paying attention to how you feel and how you experience it. But ultimately, you want this whole thing to be driven by real customer insight, real customer data. So don't worry about doing a sort of like quick and dirty version, just to get something down on the page and something that you can iterate on. But do try and make sure that this is not kind of your singular impression, like your own individual impression. It's really driven by what your real customers and real users are experiencing. So that's going to give you these touch points. You're going to be able to see then quite clearly how, where the user is going from step to step. And you can already see, just to have a look at this eBay journey, you come into the mobile app, you start searching for something, then you see some items appear, you click on one, you get through to a product details page, you can scroll down the details page, you can see some more information. If that looks good, then you might click on a buy button. You're then going to be asked to log in. Once you've logged in, you're going to get a checkout page. And the checkout, if you buy with Apple Pay, that's nice and easy. And then you're going to get to a confirmation page and you're going to see your order is confirmed. So that, as soon as you put screenshots on this, then, and that could be not just of the site, or the app itself, that could be of an email or of a, customer service chat transcript. This is going to start coming to life. So I'd always try and make it as visual as you can. At that point, once you've mapped out these actual touch points, then I'd start thinking about thoughts and feelings. So how do customers respond, and overall, how do they rate this? So capturing quotes here, so positive quotes, negative quotes, and kind of tracking their sentiment of the steps. This is really, really useful. And you can do that. So if we look at this search page, then you might find people are saying things like, oh, this is great because I can refine my search more precisely. But they might also be saying things like, there's just so many autocomplete options. This is really confusing. It's very difficult to find what I'm looking for. So again, you can do these from your own empathy to start with, but much better if you can actually do this through user testing, where you're actually watching people using the product, you're watching them go through this flow, through this journey themselves, and you're really kind of capturing real user emotion. On the sentiment side, these kinds of emotion trackers, how good is it? You can do that as a sort of, well, what's your judgment? What's, again, if you're doing this in a workshop, how does everyone in the workshop kind of feel that the user would feel at each step based on these things of like, the user stories, what are they trying to achieve? And then, what are they actually thinking and seeing down here? If you've got the data though, and particularly, if you're doing this on a consumer product where you've got a lot of traffic coming through, you may even have some kind of pop-up here. So if you have, you see these pop-ups quite often in products where they get you to rate it either with stars or with smiley faces, how was your experience? And if you're doing that, then you can actually quantify this and get some real feedback of step by step through the customer journey, how people are feeling, where they're getting frustrated, and where they are having a great experience. So in this case, I've kind of just used it as a summary. I said, actually, it's kind of neutral. Then the product page, it's kind of too much information. And then it gets a bit better because actually the login and the buying process is really simple. And as well, it's exciting to kind of actually buy the thing that you want to get, right? And then the confirmation, again, a little bit disappointing because it's kind of messy and it's not really reassuring me that I'm going to get what I think I'm going to get. So that's kind of like mapping on the different thoughts and feelings there. I like to kind of go a step further. And some people will kind of do this and some won't, but I think these kinds of customer journey maps become really, really valuable if you can then map on, further insights, quantitative insights. So can you put the, drop off from step to step or number of people getting through? Can you put other quantitative insights like, what percentage of clicks are for the first item in the search, or, how many screens do people scroll down on average? That can provide a lot of color to this map, in addition to the more qualitative feedback and the quotes that you've already got. You can also add things like provocations. So how might we do this? How might we do that? How might we make promotions more appealing? How might we reduce the cognitive load on our users? And you can also have a think about, ideas, potential solutions to some of the pain points you're seeing, some of these provocations that you're starting to ask. And this is quite a good way of, if you've got stakeholders who are saying like, oh, we need to build this thing, I've got this great idea, why don't we just quickly do X or Y, then having a customer journey map like this, where you can say like, oh, actually, yeah, we've got your idea. It's great. We've stuck it down here. But you know what? That's already a point in the journey where customers are having quite a good time, and we're going to be focusing on this other area in the customer journey where they're having a less good time. That's a very kind of easy way then for them to understand why you're prioritizing or not prioritizing an idea that they've come up with. So you don't need to commit to these. It's just a way of kind of like parking ideas so you don't forget them, also that people feel heard. So that kind of gives you a nice, rich customer journey map. And I'd say that you can do this digitally if you're working remotely or you're working in a hybrid way, then digitally is going to be really simple. It's going to be obviously like very simple to kind of pull together the screenshots and everything. If you're working with your team in real life, you know, you've got a team space, then I'd be tempted to do this on the walls of your team space, because it then will act like the extended brain of your team. And yes, you'll have to print everything out to stick it to the wall, and that's going to be a bit of a pain. But every time you walk past your desk, you're going to see what's on there, and it's going to set you thinking. And every time someone else walks past your desk, they're going to be able to see what you're working on, how you're thinking about things, what insights you've got, where perhaps you need to look for more insights. So you may find as you start to fill in this map, this matrix, that actually there are areas where you don't really understand how the customers feel, or you don't have many kind of quantitative insights about what's going on. That's totally fine. That's a good thing in a way, because that's going to help you prioritize where you do discovery going forwards to where you need to dig a little bit deeper, where you need to go and spend your time with customers to understand what's actually going on there. But the whole point of these maps then is, as you fill them out, you can then prioritize where you're going to work next, and where are the areas that you think by improving the customer journey, you can then create business impact. So I'd say as a final step, however you're doing this, somewhere you want to capture what are the main areas to focus on. So you can highlight those on the map itself step by step, but really worth just kind of pulling out what are the key areas that you want to focus on, because that's going to be the foundation of your product strategy, right? So I'd note those down. One final thing I would say about this is, for these customer journey maps, when you document the existing experience of users, that's really useful for understanding the status quo. Another way you can think about this, though, is as a way of mapping out what the ideal journey for the customer should be. So rather than looking at how customers experience the product right now, you can sort of do this in a forward-looking way to help you set your vision, where you say, hey, actually, what do we want this customer journey to look like? What would a 11 out of 10 experience look like? And that's going to help you create a storyboard. You think about almost reversing it. So saying like, okay, what is the emotion we want people to feel at each of these steps? What are the positive quotes we imagine them saying? The user story is going to stay the same, right? But then what are the features that are then going to, what do we imagine the features are that are then going to drive those positive quotes and that positive emotion? So you can drive it that way around. And that's a nice way of giving you a really kind of clear storyboard and vision for what you're trying to build, the kind of future state that you're trying to put together. So as I mentioned, we've got this kind of filled out example. We've got a blank template you can work with, and we've got that in both Miro and Figma if you want to go on Hustle Badger and check them out. But I think that's sort of like basically what I wanted to cover. I'm just talking through. If anyone's got any questions, then happy to answer those now. Okay. If there's no more questions, then oh, got one from Peter. Peter's asking, how do you propose updating this map once it's created? Yeah, I think that's a great question. Because if this is a kind of once and done exercise, then it's not going to be very useful for your team. You know, it will get forgotten and not be that useful. So I think this is something which you do have to use on a regular basis. And that's one of the reasons I really like putting it on, physically on the wall, is that it's impossible to ignore then. And then, when things do go out of date or when you do come across new insights, it's just natural to kind of stick them on the wall and update them because otherwise they're annoying. If you can't do that because you're working remotely or hybrid, then I would, try and make this a weekly or a monthly ritual where you are reviewing the journey map and you are deliberately adding on new insights, new touch points, and you're updating it and you're spending time to reflect on what's going on. So you need to kind of make it part of your discovery and planning process as you gather those insights and you think about what you're going to do next.